Hello, my little Luxes. Welcome back to another Scary Stories My Father Told Me. And I am your host, charsielux. And today I am bringing you another spooky folklore tale from my epic Beast and Creatures Myths and Tales. And this one is about little evil green creatures. If you are able to guess it, yes, this is an old folklore tale about goblins. The Goblin City. Long, long ago in the island of Krelon, there was a large city full of nothing but goblins. They were all she-goblins too, and if they wanted husbands, they used to get hold of travelers and force them to marry, and afterwards, when they were tired of their husbands, they gobbled them up. One day, a ship was wrecked upon the coast near the Goblin City, and 500 sailors were cast ashore. The she-goblins came down to the seashore and brought food and dry clothes for the sailors, and invited them to come into the city. There was nobody else there at all, but for fear that the sailors should be frightened away, the goblins, by their magic power, made shapes of people appear all around, so that there seemed to be men plowing in the fields, or shepherds tending their sheep, and huntsmen with hounds, and all the sights of the quiet country life. So when the sailors looked round and saw everything as usual, they felt quite secure, although, as you know, it was all a sham. The end of it was that they persuaded the sailors to marry them, telling them that their own husbands had gone to sea in a ship, and had been gone these 3 years, so that they must be drowned and lost forever. But really, as you know, they had served others in just the same way, and their last batch of husbands were then in prison waiting to be eaten. In the middle of the night, when the men were all asleep, the she-goblins rose up, put on their hats, and hurried down to the prison. There they killed a few men and gnawed their flesh, and ate them up, and after this feast they went home again. It so happened that the captain of the sailors woke up before his wife came home, and not seeing her there, he watched. By and by in she came. He pretended to be asleep, and looked out of the tail of his eye. She was still munching and crunching, and as she munched, she muttered, men's meat, that's what goblins like to eat." She said it over and over again, then lay down, and soon she was snoring loudly. The captain was horribly frightened to find out he had married a goblin. What was he to do? They could not fight with goblins, and they were in the goblins' power. If they had a ship, they might have sailed away, because goblins hate the water worse than a cat. But their ship was gone. He could think of nothing. However, next morning he found a chance of telling his mates what he had discovered. Some of them believed him, and some said he must have been dreaming. They were sure their wives would not do such a thing. Those who believed him agreed that they would look out for a chance of escape. But there was a kind fairy who hated those goblins, and she was determined to save the men. So she told her flying horse to go and carry them away, and accordingly, as the men were out for a walk next day, the captain saw in the air a beautiful horse with large white and gold wings. The horse fluttered down and hovered just above them, crying out in a human voice, "Who wants to go home?" I do, called out the sailors. "Climb up then," said the horse, dropping within reach. So one climbed up, and then another, and another, and although the horse looked no bigger than any other horse, there was room for everybody on his back. I think that somehow, when they got up, the fairy made them shrink small till they were no bigger than so many ants, and thus there was plenty of room for all. When all who wanted to go had got up on his back, away flew the beautiful horse and took them safely home. As for those who remained behind, that very night the goblins set upon them and mangled them and munched them to mince meat. Well, I truly hope you enjoyed that spooky folklore tale about goblins. And like I keep saying over and over again, that all of these old tales, no matter where their locations are at, they're based off of superstition and the idea of giving a moral story. Now, what's interesting is I remember this story. I remember my dad telling this story only because of the part about man's meat. That's what goblins like to eat. I remember my dad saying that line. Well, it's been very interesting going through and reading this book and going through the stories and recognizing several of them. And like I said, this one was one of those where I'm like, this seems really familiar. And as soon as I got to that part, I'm like, yes, okay, I do know this one. This one would be fun as a kid's book with illustrations and that, although obviously some kids might be a little terrified of this tale, which is one of those things where I keep saying that's probably a strong reason why I love and enjoy horror movies, was the fact that I was raised on ghost stories and the scary stories and just any type of superstitious story that you can think of that would normally scare the crap out of a kid. But yeah, like I said, I hope you enjoyed this one. Have you heard this one before? Have you heard anything similar to it? But yeah, anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on another Scary Stories My Father Told Me. And as always, I would love for you to come and join me on my Patreon, because also remember, I am the afterlife of the party, but I would love for you to join me in the afterlife of the party. And the best and easiest way to do that is to come and join me on my Patreon. And on the screen, you can see a shout out to all of my fellow Patreon members. Another special shout out to all of my Ultimate Luxes. So thank you to Kurt, Chris Bruner, and Bishop. Thank you so much for joining me on there. And always remember to slay, subscribe, like, and always be yourself. And I guess I forgot to also mention, like, there is a link in the description down below if you're interested in following me on any of my other social medias or seeing my art on my Etsy shop, and also a link to my Patreon as well. But once again, thank you so much for joining me on here. And always remember to keep an eye out, especially at night, for those evil little goblins to come munching and crunching. Until next time, bye.